German schedule. It's so we'll wait. Okay, so I think we'll begin. So my name is Manuel Muniz. I'm the provost at IE University in Spain, and I've been associated with the Munich Security Conference for quite some time. It's a real pleasure to be with you, with all of you here, and to have a set of wonderful speakers in Edmundo González, the President-elect of Venezuela, and Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament, to discuss Venezuela. We have 40-odd minutes to discuss this fundamental issue on the international agenda and on the agenda of Latin America. Coming from Spain, I can tell you that we've been following this very closely and we're very engaged with the issue. It's very important for economic, political, security dynamics in the region, and it has spillover effects all over the world because it says a lot about how we manage or fail to manage a process of growing pressure and repression of an opposition in a country. So it's a very delicate issue, and we couldn't have better people to address this with us and to navigate this with us. So thank you everybody for being here. The format is, I think we're going to have a brief exchange, but this is very much sort of a town hall kind of format, so I'll be opening this to all of you fairly quickly. So Edmundo, thank you for being here. I know you have some remarks that you want to share.
Yes.
I think it'd be extraordinarily useful if you could draw the state of affairs in Venezuela a little bit for all of us. Many of us have been following this, others maybe less intensely, but it'd be great to get a sense of where things are at for you, and then we can take it from there. So please.
Surely. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I'll say back again goodbye and good afternoon for you. As you know, South America plays a secondary role in the most important geopolitics in international security discussions. However, today I'm here to briefly explain why Mr. Maduro's regime challenged the common perception. Today, Venezuela is the weakest and most dangerous link in the security chain of the Western Hemisphere. My country is currently a gray zone of almost 1 million square kilometers in which transnational crime, drug trafficking cartels, and international terrorism converge. This dangerous dynamic is not a mere consequence of bad politicians. It is the deliberate result of coordinated policies among various international, political, and criminal actors seeking to undermine hemispheric security and the democratic stability of the West. To do so, they savagely exploit Venezuela's wealth and territory. How was this possible? Because the political project of Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro always consisted of perpetuating themselves in power. To achieve it, it was necessary from the very beginning to remove Venezuela from the orbit of influence of the leading Western democracies and build iron ties with Russia, China, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. Maduro learned well from them. After our victory on July 28, there are close to 2,000 political prisoners in Venezuela, accused of terrorism with no single proof, including top members of Maria Corina Machado's team, actually in the Argentinian embassy in Caracas, and my son-in-law, captured 2 months ago in front of his 2 children and disappeared for weeks. The dynamic is supported by Chavismo's growing links with transnational organized crime. Cocaine trafficking has proliferated in collaboration with the Colombian organization FARC and the ELN, now also with the Sinaloa cartel. Likewise, extensive dirty money laundering schemes span the entire West. Criminal groups extract gold, diamonds, coltan, and uranium from a strip of 150 kilometers, today called the Orinoco Mining Arc. The convenience of the Venezuelan government with organized crime, the worst hyperinflationary cycle in history, and the loss of 75% of the GDP in 10 years, are factors that explain the exodus of a quarter of Venezuelans, more than 8 million people. This exodus has allowed Chavismo to weaponize migration, facilitating the infiltration of criminals protected by Maduro. The Tren de Aragua, a criminal organization that in just 5 years spread from Canada to Chile, is also responsible for attacking Venezuelans' political dissident refugees abroad. In short, today we see how Venezuela, which has been a bastion of democracy and development in Latin America for decades, is now dedicated to exporting insecurity. We are a cause of hemispheric concern for all the above, but this can change drastically. In fact, current situation can be seen as an opportunity for the West. Unlike other countries with great human, geographical, and natural resources, Venezuela has a deep-rooted democratic culture. This is why our fight against Maduro's autocracy has always been civic and peaceful. We demonstrated and ratified it that on July 28, when almost 70% of the voters supported my option for a demonstrating change. In addition, if Maduro had not prevented millions of Venezuelans from voting, that number would be possibly reached 90%. Our country is plagued by social, ethnic, or religious conflict. It's not plagued. Our population today has an advantage level of education and professionalization, well above the average of developing countries. The diaspora brings resources from abroad, and our citizens mentally is more oriented than ever to the productive work. We also have a government program prepared by the world-class professionals with extensive careers in international organizations. We are seasoned in the greatest adversities. The country is almost entirely united against small autocratic leadership that oppress its support of the enemies of the West. We just need a chance, the unequivocal and determined support of our main allies, the democracies of the West. With your support, working together on a national reconstruction plan, yielding opportunity for all, Venezuela can be converted into a bastion of hemispheric security and the energy hub for Western democracies. Faced with today's threats and challenge, democrats around the world must act together. It's all about building win-to-win links. Otherwise, our country may fail one by one under the influence of trans-hemispheric autocracies. The West is a community of mutual values and interests, and we will prevail as long as we keep this in mind. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for those remarks. That is a very stark depiction of affairs in Venezuela, very widespread electoral fraud, the opposition being denied its right for a peaceful transition, linkages to organized crime. So what you've just depicted for us is a highly concerning picture about a state of affairs in the country. Madam President Roberta, how do you see this? I mean, you know each other. Edmundo, of course, received the Sakharov Prize from the Parliament a couple of months ago. What's your take on developments in Venezuela and implications? And beyond the assessments, I'm very quickly going to try to move you to next steps and to see how we can draw a path towards a solution in the conflict. But first of all, how do you see the state of things in Venezuela as we speak?
So first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the stage with Edmundo, President-elect of Venezuela. It was important for me to be here. I preside over a parliament that works based on elections and democratic results. People vote, results are in, people are elected, and then take the positions. This did not happen in Venezuela. And the European Parliament recognized that immediately. We were the first to respond in saying this result needs to be accepted, the votes need to be tallied, they need to be counted. We then started working with what we now call, along of what I now call the Venezuela majority in the European Parliament, which is a number of members who form the majority of the Parliament in pushing forward resolutions, in giving the Sakharov Prize, which was then awarded unanimously to Edmundo and also to Maria Corina, whom I had the pleasure of speaking with yesterday, and who identified what, first of all, the situation is. And here I can be open. Too few people know what the situation in Venezuela is. You said in your beginning by saying that it's important for you as a Spanish. All my Spanish colleagues in the European Parliament would join you in saying that, but not many others, because they don't know what is happening. They would like to have more information. They would like to know what is going to happen to the over 7 million displaced Venezuelans abroad. The neighboring countries that have taken a very huge responsibility for those individuals. What would happen, what are the conditions for their safe return? How, if you look at the wealth of Venezuela, the economy has been destroyed with two back-to-back autocratic, undemocratic and illicit regimes. How members of Maria Corina's team are in the Argentinian embassy, have now been stripped of electricity, of water. They're in a severe condition. How anybody who expresses disdain, opposition to the regime is hunted, is taken down, is arrested, is silenced. And this is something that we will not stand for. And that is why I wanted to open with my remarks saying that we have been extremely vocal. We would like the sanctions to be broader. We would like more voices also in the European Union in saying it as it is and not playing around with, let's say, diplomatic words. I spoke also to the Speaker of the House of Congress in the US, my counterpart, Mike Johnson, and when we were talking about where we could be aligned, Venezuela was one of the foreign policy issues, but which go beyond foreign policy in terms of geopolitical stability. Then Edmundo also referred to countries, Venezuela's not the only one, that could become a hotbed of the exact opposite of the values that we hold dear. This is happening not in our immediate neighborhood of the European Union. It's sort of dominating these few days here in Munich. But make no mistake, the infiltration of those who fight for the exact opposite of what we stand for is very broad and is very wide. And if we don't, as democratic allies, as you call them Western friends, come together and say this is not tolerable, then I fear that this world is going to become much worse than it already is. At the moment, we can really look around. I just came from 2 days in the Middle East, where I went to Israel and Palestine. I just came back today, and it is something that I take back with, how important democracy is, how important elections are, and how important that results are respected.
Absolutely. So this is a perfect segue into this second piece of our conversation, which is what do we do moving forward? And I remember we had the fortune of hosting Edmundo in Madrid not too long ago, and I remember at the time we were having a conversation, and you had said, and you said this in public, that your core idea was to go back to Venezuela for the swearing-in ceremony, to take office of the elections that you had legitimately won. Ultimately, you didn't do that. Maybe you can share with us why. I think it's pretty clear to all of us why. But the regime seems to be hardening. The repression seems to be spreading. So could you draw for us, if you had your choice, if you could set the policies of other countries and other blocs like that of the EU, how would a solution to this look like for you? How can we begin to address this problem?
First of all, I want to protect the vote of almost 8 million Venezuelans who vote for me in the 28th July election. That's a compromise that I have. I used to say that I was going to Venezuela to be sworn in, but the conditions are not made that present. If I go there, I assume that as soon as I put the feet on the ground, I will be made in prison, as they did it recently with my son-in-law, that so far we don't know where he is. 37 days, captured in front of 2 children, 7 and 8 years old, in this past month. So that's why I didn't go to Venezuela to be sworn in, and I am expecting the conditions be met in order to fulfill the will of the Venezuelan, 8 million, almost 8 million Venezuelans who vote for my candidacy.
Now, I want to bring you, Roberta, in as well, because there was, of course, an episode that has been, I think you've been asked about this repeatedly, which was the Juan Guaidó episode, where a lot of countries also recognized him as a legitimate interlocutor. There were severe issues with that process, and I think there is now reluctance in some places, although it's diminishing, to go down that path again. You mentioned the Spanish take on this. For some countries, this is both a major issue and it's also a very complicated issue to manage, because the regime continues to have widespread control of the country. Some of our countries, Spain has close to 400,000 citizens, passport holders in Venezuela. We also owe them some capacity to manage their interests. We have companies there. So we live in this very dystopian scenario where we clearly have a legitimate opposition that is raising fully legitimate concerns about the way the regime is behaving and is unable to go back. But our countries also have the need to, and this is long-standing diplomatic practice, dealing with those that have effective control on the ground. So, but maybe you have different ideas. You already outlined some of them. What do you think? I mean, specifically, is it on sanctions? Is it on the language of recognition? Is it of support for the opposition in other fronts? I mean, how do you see this moving forward?
All of what you said. I think, there's nothing autocrats like more than to be ignored. Why? Because then they can do exactly what they want, where they completely control the message, where they clamp down on any opposition, where they benefit from the economy taking the biggest hit in order for the citizens who live in that country to be completely dependent on them. This is a playbook that you see everywhere. I grew up in youth politics, protesting against corruption, autocracy, dictatorship. And we see in 2025 that backsliding on our democratic values is increasing rather than decreasing. And the number of people in the world who are being led by democratically elected, chosen politicians, representatives, is less than those who are not. And that's a reality that we need to face with in 2025. And that means that we need to make sure that we continue to help the opposition, that we continue to help civil society actors on the ground, that we send the clearest of message that they are not alone. Because that is the hardest. When you fight day after day, and sometimes you see people giving up. And that is what we saw also in the past with Venezuela, also in terms of recognition, in terms of boosting in a way the resources that people who were fighting a very difficult regime had. And slowly, slowly it disappears from the narrative. And it disappears also from the narrative that is not in Spanish. That it disappears from the narrative of media outlets whose very existence depends on helping democratic movements. So that is why we have called for harsher and wider sanctions on more than just individuals. And we've called for clarity. Now, I represent the European Union. There is also, let's say, quite common messaging of the fact that we are not always united on everything. I would consider that to be, I would say, one of our weaknesses, but does not have to be something we are afraid to say. If anything, we need to see how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to engage as a European Union in order to show our citizens, including Venezuelans who live in the European Union, that we are not abandoning them. I meet a lot of Venezuelans, also in my country, who come to me and say, please don't forget us. And it's the same that you feel, and it's in a time when geopolitics is overshadowing everything else we do, then the risk is that priorities change. And that's not something that I would like to see happen. That's something that I will work against. But that also means that I need all your help in terms of keeping it on the agenda. Edmundo's speech before the European Parliament was fantastic. We also had Maria Corina's daughter with us. But you could tell also when the Sakharov Prize was given to Edmundo for freedom of thought and democracy. This is our pivotal prize of the European Parliament, and we are very proud of it, and it's a very well-respected one. But you could tell also, remember, and the journalists in the press conference who were asking us, okay, so explain to us more. How can we report on this in our media in different member states? And that's our job, how to make sure, back to your question, all of those conditions that you set out in order to keep the cause top of our agenda, all the conditions that Edmundo mentioned need to be respected.
Hey, Edmundo, I'll ask you a question, and then if anybody, I'll bring folks in because we have 20-odd minutes. Well, I have a very simple question, which is why is this instance different to that of Juan Guaidó, which was the last time that the opposition, and I know there are major differences, but if you could tell us. And then I want to weave in a question on this about the U.S. administration, the incoming administration. What are your expectations regarding their Venezuela policy? We know the Secretary of State has had Venezuela, is very close to his heart. He's sponsored bills, Venezuela and Cuba in the Senate. So, you know, he's maybe one of the most Latin America leaning secretaries of state that the U.S. has had. So there is that, but there's also, again, and this is one of the difficulties of the conflict, the actual collaboration of the U.S. government with the authorities in Caracas on deportations and on others. I think Trump recently said that Maduro was a great guy. So, I mean, you have a bit of a dissonance there, although I think we've all learned not to read too much into what Trump says. He says don't take him literally, take him seriously. No, so no, not literally. So these two questions. So the Juan Guaidó episode, and then if you could tell us how you view the incoming administration and how you think that might change dynamics in Venezuela.
This question of Guaidó as an example, as a contrast with my candidacy, is always present in our conversation. And I always respond with this. There is a big difference. Guaidó was nominated in virtue of an article of the Constitution that allowed him to exerce the presidency. In my case, there are almost 8 million people who vote for my candidacy. That's quite a different and totally different picture. Concerning the U.S. administration, we spoke with Rubio, Maria Corina and I, by video, the day after he was sworn in. And we had a long conversation concerning what we can expect from the U.S. government in connection with the policies to Venezuela. It was a very long frank and useful conversation. And we think...
In Spanish, I assume.
Yes, it was in Spanish, indeed. And I think we are in the right track. I mean, we think that in this administration knows where the problem is, where is it going to tackle. And we hope that this is going to be very near.
If anybody wants to come in, just let me know. Maybe here. I'll grab a question here and then a couple here. It's here, up front.
Thank you. My name is Elena Mota. I am Congress member from Guatemala with the Movimiento Semilla. And I have an easy question, I guess. I'd like to know what can we do to help you properly? That's the question.
We went to Guatemala about 3 weeks ago. We had a long and frank conversation with the president, and he understood completely what the problem is. He offered his advice, his support, and everything that he can do, it would be useful to achieve the Venezuelan transition to democracy.
And we as an international community?
The international community as well. All the pressure, the diplomatic pressure exerts on Maduro regime is welcome. And this is the only reason why we think that he's going to be put in a position that he's not going to be back.
Gracias. Mucho gusto, Presidente.
Gracias. There was one here, first row, and then in the back.
Thank you, Raj Kumar from DevX. I know we commented a little bit about the Trump administration's policies. Another element of their policy is what's happening with USAID. And I wonder whether there are consequences in terms of funding for the Venezuelan opposition that are happening because of the stopping of U.S. foreign assistance, and whether that's something the European Parliament or European authorities are looking to whether they can support the opposition if this is having consequences for them.
U.S. assistance is not the only one that we have in the opposition. We have any other options, any other contributions from abroad that help us to keep this fight against the authoritarianism.
I can come in. Of course, the U.S. is in a position to decide on where its aid goes. And it's important that we say it, because it's not up to us to tell the US what to do. But, of course, the requests for assistance have increased for us. We have seen in the last few weeks across all the areas of development, of democracy, that we invest quite highly in, with quite a lot of our partners internationally having to tell us, look, this is in trouble. At the same time, we also have the counter debate in the European Union. Is it also the time where we question our funding, how we have spent it, and where it's gone? And my reaction has been, very clear. I'll just give you a little example. Yesterday, I was on Thursday. I went to Gaza to visit our EU border assistance mission. And this is a small group of people who are at the moment responsible for evacuating the sickest of people into Egypt. And that's the EU investment assistance that is on the ground and tangible. Without that presence, that would not be possible, and it would not be a key to the ceasefire and hostage deal. So 2025 has started with difficulty, but also with an identification of where the European Union can come in, can fill gaps, but also be more responsible. And we're having to answer the same questions, but also having to look at where our priorities are. And my hope is that the immediate decisions, of course, that have been taken in the first weeks of this administration will also be tempered against what could develop in terms of the new relations that are created between the current administration and countries such as Venezuela, where, as you said, Secretary of State has been, consistent in terms of his friendship to your country, and we see that. And our Spanish colleagues actually see that in terms of looking at it very positively with regards to alignment on what we do in Latin America.
And it's not just USAID. I mean, I was speaking to a colleague before this. It's the entire ecosystem of institutions in Washington that do democracy development and democracy support are seeing cuts in different places. So it'd be very interesting to see how that affects the medium-term ability of the U.S. to support these movements, because it's a real dismantling of part of this ecosystem. Yeah. But from your answer, it doesn't seem to be particularly dramatic for the Venezuelan case, at least as of now, which is an interesting answer.
You know that we went to Washington about less than a month ago, and we did a big dates meetings with almost most of the political actors in Washington. And we have very receptive responses from all these actors that we met.
Okay, well, that's very good to know. There's another question.
Hello, good evening. I'm Ricardo Della Coleta. I'm a journalist for the Brazilian newspaper, Folha de São Paulo. President Edmundo, after the election, both Brazil and Colombia, they've tried to carry a diplomatic approach on the crisis, on demanding the actas, but we haven't heard of any new diplomatic approach from these two countries recently. So I wanted to ask you, do you consider that, that especially in the Brazilian case, the diplomatic approach that the Brazil gave up, that Brazil is no longer engaging in the topic of Venezuela, and building on that, the main advisor of Lula, Celso Amorim, is here in the conference. Did you have the opportunity to speak to him during this conference? Thank you.
I saw him in the corridors about 1 day or yesterday. I salute him, but he was very hectic and occupied with meetings. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity today to meet him. We met at least twice this year in other occasions, and I hope to see him before the conference ends. But the Colombian and Brazilian efforts is there, and we hope it keeps giving the results that we hope to give.
I have another question on this, which is, of course, the sort of worst case scenario here, that the regime continues to harden. It seems to have quite wide control of the use of force on the ground and the armed forces. It seems, I mean, connections to very widely armed militias around the country. You have laid out a path of peaceful opposition to the regime. I assume that that is what you foresee in the coming future being the case, because there is the possibility, of course, of deep destabilization in the country and of violence. No? If that strategy doesn't work, but I was just wondering if you could comment on that for us, because this is part of the complexity of the problem.
In our view, the military, the top hierarchy of the military is with the regime. From there downwards, the rest is like the society of Venezuela at present. 70–80% are with me, and the rest with the government. And I think this figure will repeat for the near future.
And the weapons and the militias and the armed groups that have linkages to the government, how big of a concern is that to you on the transition?
Obviously, it's a matter of concern, but we hope that we can cope with that.
Roberta. Oh, sorry, you want to come in?
No, it's okay.
Sure. My name is Roberto Patiño. I'm also from Venezuela, also in the fight for democracy, and honored to see our president-elect here representing us. Venezuela has the largest migration crisis in the world. More than 8 million people have left the country. And as days go by, more people leave the country. So we are in dire need of change and of leadership. During these days in the conference, we've been hearing a lot about the wake-up call for Europe, right? For Europe to be a leader, for Europe to be in front of promoting democratic norms. Can we expect Europe to lead with respect to Venezuela and the promotion of democracy? It's great to have, by the way, a panel on Venezuela at MSC. I really appreciate the effort of the conference for that. But can we expect that? And what would you say, President Metsola, what is the argument that resonates most with Europeans about Venezuela, so we can promote that with force?
Can I piggyback on this and add an element of controversy? Because we had the speech from J.D. Vance yesterday, which really posed some serious questions on the resilience and legitimacy of European democracies. Do you feel that you represent a continent that has severe internal issues on the democratic front, and that hinders our ability to lead somewhere else?
Oh, thanks for this. Okay. I was waiting for it, actually. 9 minutes left. No, first of all, we can argue about where we agree or not on what was said. What I think that we need to wake up to is something that the parliament I preside over woke up to last June. And that is a sense of citizens wanting their politicians to do better, to do more, to be faster, to be more responsive, not to place them in ideological pigeonholes, and for them to know that their elected representatives are working for them and not the other way around. Might sound simplistic, but country by country, we see that this is what people feel when they go to vote. And again, I base everything I say on the fact that we are elected, and that my people elected me to continue to serve them, just like my 719 colleagues were elected to serve the people that they represent. And we have a job to do. And the first job is to see where we went wrong, how we could do better. What does unity mean? Because everybody says we need to be more united. As I said earlier, just because we have different views does not mean that we are weak. We treasure what Europe is and what it has produced and where it has been and where we can be. Can we do much more? Absolutely. Are we looking at, from a competitiveness point of view, besides democracy, that we are losing races? Of course. Are we being tasked with looking at our legislative framework, our democratic framework, and saying where things could be better? Absolutely. Do we have media freedom that is being attacked in some countries more and more every day? Yes. We set up the so-called democracy shield because we were really worried before last election as to the kind of interference that could be seen from outside influences. But, again, it's our responsibility to fight back. And my response to the general, what is Europe going to do, is that let's see where we can do better, and let's be self-confident when we say it. Because the worst that we could do as a continent is look inwards and blame each other. We tend to do that in the European Union. And that's not what will make us better. What will make us better is being to seriously able, with our democratic systems, compete. That we can be around tables where decisions are taken. That we are going to offer solutions rather than drag people down. That we are going to be the first ones to say, look, Venezuelans living in Spain. I met with the president of the Madrid region and said, you know, one of the most successful, let's say, integration we met in Madrid, Edmundo, has been with Venezuelans who live in Spain and the Madrid region. And that is something that we have to look at and use as opportunities of saying, look, Europe stepped up. Europe also has stepped up, by the way, in terms of humanitarian aid in Venezuela. Since 2018, we've had over 443 million euros of aid going to support the democratic forces. So I think that we need, and I would like you to leave this conference with a sense of understanding that, yes, Europe is looking at itself going, you know, can we spend more on defense? Of course. Can we do more in terms of supporting democracy? Can we make sure that we are serious about when we say we're going to enlarge? Can we look at our citizens and say we are going to deliver for you, so that when I present myself as a candidate again in 2029 to my citizens, I'm not going to be able to tell them, listen, I delivered on this, but not on the rest because, you know, we were busy with other things. Our citizens don't want that anymore. They want things to happen now, and they want their lives to be a little bit fairer, their lives to be a little bit safer, their lives to be a little bit more prosperous. And that's something that Europe, I would say, is awake for, but now we need to deliver, and that's my job, and I take it on my responsibility.
It's clearly one of the bigger questions coming out of this conference is what is Europe going to do? We cannot simply have a reactive answer to whatever the U.S. decides to do. We have to have a proactive answer of what we want to do in the world, and the Venezuelan case is going to be a litmus test of this in a very important part of the world. I have a question up here and then another one down here, please.
Thank you very much, President. Es un placer verlo aquí.
It's a pleasure having you here, Mr. President.
First of all, I'd like to thank the President of the European Parliament for her first words, but also for being at this panel here. Because as we all know, most of the panels we heard during these days here are about Ukraine, and it's good to see that I think you are the third biggest personage in the European Union, right? And you are here showing that this is a big issue.
That's debatable. We can argue that. No, I'm joking.
But for me, what I see is a big problem, President, and you answered very quickly. Someone already asked this question. The criminalization of many levels of the Venezuelan army right now. Everything that we observed on what is happening on the border with Colombia in particular, with clearly armed groups from Colombia who are heavily involved in illegal traffickings. Cocaine, obviously, but also people trafficking through the Darien on the border with Venezuela. I was 2 weeks ago in Cucuta. I could see that almost with my own eyes. And then the refugees in all the regions, the Andean countries. And he left. I very much like the question of the journalist from the Folha de São Paulo, because I ended my trip with a visit to Brasilia. And I was surprised how low you are on the agenda of Brazil. When speaking with the people in the security forces of Brazil, they were telling me very clearly that these big gangs that they have in Brazil, now the PCC, is taking the cocaine down from the rivers coming directly from Venezuela down to Fortaleza, Belém. And for the European Union, what we see, Geneva Accord, with the works we do in the Sahel, we see most of the commanders of the armed groups there trafficking up towards Europe, the cocaine coming from Belém, Fortaleza. So, President, that will be, I believe, a huge challenge, this criminalization of the armed forces of Venezuela, and I'd be happy to hear if you have a plan for that. I know it's not an easy question. Sorry for that.
And it's not just a Venezuelan problem, it's a regional problem. I'm going to suggest we collect the last one and then we close because we have only a couple of minutes. There was a question here in the front row.
Yes, thank you very much. Miguel Berger, I'm from the German Foreign Service. President-elect, I would have like to have your opinion on the way the European Union approached the elections in Venezuela. If we look back, you got the 8 million votes, you were elected, but on the other side, were we naive when we expected Maduro to really hand over power? Did you expect that he would respect the results of elections? And second, on Rubio, I mean, it's good to hear that you had a frank conversation, but what would you expect the US to do differently from the pressure and the sanctions we have had before? Where do you really expect a political change? And a small footnote at the end, I've seen that Maria Corina engaged with this meeting in Madrid of the far-right European movements. My recommendation would be don't make the wrong allies in Europe with Le Pen and Orban.
Yeah.
So, over to you.
How would I start? I should start with the first question there, but I forgot your question. Can you summarize just briefly?
Criminalization.
It's sort of the criminal gangs and...
The military. Well, as I said, the hierarchy of the armed forces, the top of the rank at the level of generals, are committed with the government. That's for sure. Probably very few exceptions. But down there, I'm sure the political opinions are the same that the rest of the society. I mean, 70, 80% is with me, and the rest with the government. That's, in gross figures, what is the composition of the armed forces.
And the connection to organized crime, to trafficking, how?
Well, this is a very complex issue that you raise, and we have no simple answer, ni simple measures to tackle that problem. It's a very complex, it's a very delicate situation in which many factors are included. It's coke trafficking, drug trafficking, and all the things that made this issue very, very, very complex for us.
But does it make the regime more resilient? Does it mean that there are forces that will make it more resourceful, more resilient, more difficult?
It is. It is more difficult, of course. And we have to tackle this from different perspectives, not only the force.
And the question on the linkages to European politics, and we've seen this in Spain because Venezuela is a polarized topic in Spain. Mm-hmm. It's part of the national political debate. You're a diplomat and you're navigating it very wisely, both in Spain and beyond. But I think I would assume one of your challenges is not to have your cause captured by X or Y political movements, but to keep it a transversal issue on democracy, on fighting criminality, and on a peaceful transition, I would assume. But
not to avoid the answer, but I didn't see the program that you mentioned with Maria Corina talking with other people. I understand that it's with some leaders from the right parties.
We had a wonderful meeting of the European patriots in Madrid. That was controversial.
Yeah.
And that occupied a lot of our media coverage. And
I can imagine.
The question is about your political movement being captured by the far right.
I can imagine
as a cause of the far right, which would, of course, I think, be hurtful almost, in any other part of the political spectrum, which is broad, thankfully.
No, surely.
If I can come in at a tangent to this, is that when the decision was taken for Edmundo and Maria Corina to get the Sakharov Prize, and I presented it, and of course there were different nominations, and this was originally a center-right nomination. In the end, all 8 political groups agreed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good message to send. That what happened in Venezuela is among our priority focuses of the European Parliament. And if it's surprising to you that I'm here, then we should do more. Because what happens in Venezuela is very important to us, and we will continue to be very vocal on it. I will insist on it, and I will also make sure that this is not only being discussed within the Spanish members of the European Parliament, but also by everyone. It's very important. The risk is that it wouldn't, but that's my commitment to do.
We have 2 minutes, so I might just take the privilege of being the moderator to ask a final question. What brought us here? What is specific to the Venezuelan case, one of the wealthiest countries of Latin America, middle class, human capital? What has brought us here? What is the fragility? What are the lessons learned, and what would you do different if you were to exercise the office of president to what was done prior to Chavez? That, of course, has to some extent enabled or allowed for this tragedy to occur in the country. Are there any lessons learned?
I came here to explain the European public, in this case, the reality of what is going on in Venezuela. What we have suffered during the 25 years of government of Maduro's and Chavez regime. What would we expect? And what do we expect from the international community to help us to finish off this tragedy?
you have a big agenda ahead of you if you succeed.
Yeah.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this discussion.